All right. Well, do you guys think we should go ahead and start rolling in? We've got 19 people signed on. So welcome to all of you who just signed on. Um, let's see. So Emily, I guess I'm going to mute everybody. And then are you able to see the waiting room now?
I am.
You are.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, so if you wouldn't mind letting folks in as they join, and then I'll mute everybody and then share my screen. And then if you have a question, just type it in the chat, and Emily can either answer directly because she's also somewhat of a vulture expert, or she can ask over the audio. So I think that'd probably be the easiest way to do it. Okay, well, there's some more folks coming in. I think I'll get started. So I'm going to mute everybody. I'll just do a quick intro. Let's see. Current, no, be muted. Yes. Okay, continue. I'm going to do a quick intro. I'm the president of Charleston Audubon. My name is Jen Tyrrell, and we have our talks coordinator, Paul Nolan, here, and Emily Davis, our vice president. And we have David McLean as one of our conservation chairs. So we have lots of awesome members on the call here. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about vultures, one of my favorite birds, because not everyone loves them. So hopefully we will all learn lots about vultures today. So I'm going to share this real quick and see if you guys are seeing the correct screen. Okay, are you guys seeing the main screen or the presentation screen? It's good? Okay, cool.
Jen, we can see it.
You can, okay, thank you. All right, so I have a talk all about vultures from all around the world, just some cool information, why they're awesome, and why people have hated or loved them throughout the years. And then I go into a little bit about their conservation issues, but this is a general outline of the talk here. I'm hoping you guys can all recognize that first one that was on the intro screen. That's one of our very common ones we have around here. But I'm going to go into vulture culture, lore, vultures of the world, old and new, some really cool adaptations because they're awesome, misconceptions and reality, the vultures that we have here, some of their ecology, vultures in peril, and then International Vultures Awareness Day. So that's a lot, but I promise I won't go for too long. So vultures have been in our human history and human culture for a very, very long time. This particular, I think it's called a pictograph, but a cave drawing or a dwelling drawing is from 7500 BC. And that's from the ancient Turkey region of the world. It's Katal Hayuk. It's a very famous archaeological site. But this picture shows that in their culture, they would have sky burials. There was one of the first sky burials. They would take their deceased and they would actually remove the head, and then they would put the body up on this tower for the vultures to pick clean. And then once the bones were clean, they would actually reunite it with the head and then like put it in a bench in the house. So like you take your relative and put them into an ottoman to have in the household for a long time. I don't know when you run out of room, if everyone goes in the same one, if everyone has their own, I don't know. But a very interesting use of vultures with that group there. And they actually saw them as symbols of obviously regeneration and transition and also rebirth. So some of these pictures from ancient Turkey will have the picture of what looks like a baby person, little fetal human inside. So they saw it as possibly a way of reincarnation too. So really neat views of vultures with that society. In ancient Egypt, they had a different kind of role, which is interesting. They were seen as a maternal and protective type force. A lot of you have probably seen vultures when they do that sunning thing. They hold their wings out. And they saw that as a protective and maternal type behavior. And so they were often featured on the headdresses of different goddesses and deities, along with the cobra, which I believe is mainly a symbol for royalty and just stature and stuff like that. But usually you see the vultures and the cobras together. And then the Aztecs and the Mayans, a lot of us know that they were somewhat well known for human sacrifice in their rituals. And so vultures were obviously a big part of that, I'm sure. I bet they got pretty habituated to when they were doing things like that. And so they are often featured in ceremonial vessels and their carvings and stuff like that on their temples. So fairly common there too. And then one of the more well-known and still practiced sky burial locations is in Tibet. It was also known to happen with Native Americans. They did sky burials, Buddhists, and ancient Iranians. And so just to explain the sky burials here, I learned a good bit about it reading up on it through this, and it's a really neat process, but also very graphic. And what's interesting is when a family member would die, they would kind of bind them up so they're in a sitting position, and then someone else would come, another group, usually religious leaders, the monks and things like that, and they would take the body up to the mountains. And so it wasn't anywhere near any of the suburban areas where people were living, and the family didn't go with them, so it was just kind of like a quiet sacred thing. And once they got up there, they had someone kind of prepare it, if you know what I mean. They would prepare the body, and they would actually light a specific ceremonial smoke that would attract the vultures in and the condors in. So they use it as a visual cue to train them. And then the vultures would do their job, and it was part of the ritual that every bit of the body had to be consumed in order for it to move on to the next level. And so they had someone called the body crusher, the bone crusher. And so that person usually prepped the body, and then once it was picked clean, they would actually go in and smash all the bones and then mix it with flour and kind of make a dough and almost make like hush puppies out of the bone meal, and like chuck it back into the vultures for them to finish it all up, to make sure every last little bit of that body was actually taken up, or else it was considered, I don't know, good luck or bad luck. But, they really wanted the whole thing to be gone, and that was part of the ceremony. So they have been in our culture for a very, very long time. And we have two different groups of vultures. So I'm going to move on to the old world vultures and the new world vultures. Old world being this hemisphere here, and new world over here. We have this one on the left is New World vulture. I'm sure you guys are all familiar. That's a turkey vulture. And this one is an Egyptian vulture. And looking at them, they look very similar. I mean, even though many of you probably have not seen an Egyptian vulture on the right there, looking at it, you'd say, yes, that's obviously a vulture. Look at that bald head, that hooked bill. It just has a very similar look to it. But what's really cool is that these guys are not related hardly at all, except by the fact that they're birds. They came from different ancestors. And another example of this, so you get the idea, is some penguins from the South Pole, and then puffins and similar birds like that from the North Pole. They look very similar. They have a lot of, similar feeding habits, a lot of coloration similarities, and things like that. But they're, again, not related, because you have flighted puffins and you have penguins, but they look very similar. And we call that convergent evolution. So these birds evolved to fill a niche somewhere in the world, but they just got there in different ways. So our birds, so vultures from the old world evolved from eagles. So that's who they're related to. And for any of you who know much about eagles, they are scavengers, they're thieves, they're very opportunistic. And so it kind of makes sense that a group of eagles kind of just went very swiftly into the solely scavenging kind of range. And then our vultures came from storks. So storks are their closest relatives, but for those of you who are familiar with storks, they also will scavenge sometimes too. They're opportunistic, and one really cool feature that they share, which I'm going to talk more about a little bit later, is urohydrosis. So when you know that they both have that practice of urinating on their legs, leaving this like white chalky residue for various reasons that we'll go into later. It makes sense, not many birds do that. So the storks and the New World vultures have that. All right, next. This is just an illustration of some of the old world vultures that we have. There's about 20 species, and this obviously is not all of them, but it's a good representation of a lot of them. So more diverse in the old world than in the new world. And some of the kind of standout birds of the old world vulture group, just because they're known for different things. One is a Rappel's vulture. And their little claim to fame is the highest recorded flight ever. They were recorded at 40,000 feet. And that was observed by I think it was a commercial airline. And I can't remember if this is the case with this one. I think it is, but I think they hit it at 40,000 feet, and they were able to identify what hit their engine through genetic study and looking at the feathers, and they found out that it was a Rappel's vulture all the way up at 40,000 feet at cruising altitude. So very impressive. They're the highest flyers. And then the Egyptian vultures are one of the ones that you see fairly often. They're used in movies a good bit, and they're very pretty. They're from Africa and Asia, and in Turkey and Bulgaria during ancient times, they were praised for saving Muhammad from a golden eagle. I don't know much about that background story, but they said that he earned its white plumage. And then in the Bible, it's referred to as unclean and shouldn't be eaten, which is probably a good rule of thumb, whether it came from the Bible or not. And they were also used in ornithomancy, which is a way of telling the future or predicting the future using the movement of birds. And so in Europe, I think a lot of philosophers and people would look at the movements of big flocks of starlings and big murmurations, and they would predict the future and good fortune and stuff from that. And so Egyptian vultures were observed for that same reason. And I'll go a little bit more into them later, but the cool thing that they're used for today is parahawking. So if you haven't heard of parahawking, it should be called paravulturing, but people will actually go paragliding in the mountains with trained vultures, and they'll fly around you and you can call them up to your glove and pretty much just fly with the vultures. So that's pretty cool. I've never been. Looks like a lot of fun. She looks like she's having a lot of fun. So one quick thing too about vultures, they are very intelligent, and so if they are imprinted on people, they're trained very easily to do educational demonstrations or parahawking or things like that. So they're much smarter than people give them credit for. So this is the lappet-faced, I think this is a lappet-faced vulture, and it is a very charismatic, interesting species. And so it shows up in memes a lot, funny bird memes. And so I thought these were both very funny because whenever I have pockets in my dress, I'm always like, look, it has pockets, just like it looks like they're doing. And then we have, this is a white-headed vulture, very pretty, and it's got that classic collar that you see in kind of the cartoon vultures. And I believe this one also has an exposed crop, which I'll go into in a little bit. But that's just kind of a general sampling of some of the old world vultures, just so you get an idea of what they look like compared to our new world vultures. Overall similar, but there are definitely some structural differences you'll probably notice as we go along. So the new world vultures, we have a few different kinds, not nearly as many, but starting down here, we have the California condor. This is the Andean condor. And then we have the king vulture, which is from South America, a very tropical species. We have our buddy, the black vulture, and the turkey vulture. And then we have the greater yellow-headed vulture and the lesser yellow-headed vulture. So these guys are also a tropical species that we don't see here very often. So those are our group. And just to give you an idea of how pretty vultures can be, because a lot of people think they're ugly, look at that guy. That is a king vulture. The coloration on it is just stunning. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with, breeding displays and mate selection and things like that, but just a gorgeous bird. And the lesser yellow-headed vulture is also a very, very pretty vulture. And it's got that really cool, just blood red eye, which I think is really interesting. And then during the breeding season, they really, change into a lot of different shades of colors and have a lot of variation, almost like it's like a rainbow on their head. So very cool, but you can see they're similar to a turkey vulture in that they've got that open nares right there. All the better to smell you with. And then here's the Andean condor, and it's the world's largest flighted bird, and it can reach up to 33 pounds. That's a big old bird. And then we have our California condor, which was severely reduced in numbers, and we'll talk about their conservation a little bit later, but a very, very cool bird. And I think I love that little black feather collar they have on. Looks like a feather bow of someone from Downton Abbey or something, but a very beautiful bird. And then we have our guys. So we have the black vulture up top here and a turkey vulture here. And you can tell this one is a little bit on the younger side. It's got a lot of black fuzz. So really young turkey vultures will actually have a dark head, and so they're sometimes mistaken for black vultures, just depending on what stage of life they're in. And they also get a whiter bill as time goes on. So you can tell that one's probably on the younger side. So anatomy and adaptations. Vultures are well built and well suited for what they do. So I'm going to go through some of the misconceptions first, but These are two black vultures, obviously. This is Audubon's depiction of them going after a dead deer. And what's interesting and kind of gross is they look for easy openings to the body, because deer have very tough hides, pigs have very tough hides, hogs and things like that. So they'll often look for an easy point of entry, which is often the eyes, the mouth, and other openings. And one thing people, often think about when they see vultures circling is they're like, oh, the vultures are circling, there must be something dead there. Not often, or sometimes. Vultures sometimes circle over something that's already dead as they're just coming down to it once they've seen what it is, just to get a lay of the land. But usually when you see vultures circling, they are taking advantage of convection cells. So vultures, because you don't know when the next thing is going to die, when you're going to eat again, you need to conserve energy as much as you can. And because you don't have a little hunting territory where you know prey is, you need to cover large areas at one time. And so they will take advantage of these convection cells and use them like free elevator rides. So they'll often roost kind of high up, and then as soon as the air starts to warm up during the day, they'll take off, ride these convection cells, and then glide down and then ride back up. And so vultures can go for, probably maybe 100+ miles or so. I don't know the exact number, but without ever having to flap their wings. So it's amazing how efficient they are at traveling and covering a lot of ground using the air currents. So the circling vultures doesn't always mean there's something dead. It means they're probably going over a nice hot parking lot that's giving them a free lift. Then once they do find something, they'll end up on the ground and they'll hang around the dead. And a group of vultures on the ground is called a wake or a venue. So it's kind of funny. They're visiting the dead. So it's a wake for whatever that was. And a lot of times turkey vultures will show up first because they have a very good sense of smell, and black vultures don't. So if you look at the face of a black vulture versus a turkey vulture, you'll see a difference in their nares or their nasal openings. And you can see a black vulture, it's very thin, like a little slit almost. And then in a turkey vulture, you could like stick your finger through it if you wanted to. So that's a big difference between the two of them. So black vultures will actually follow turkey vultures to a kill site most times. And black vultures, I believe, Emily, you might be able to confirm or deny this, but I think turkey vultures have a longer wingspan, but black vultures are typically heftier.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you can't say one is bigger than the other. The turkey vulture is bigger with wingspan, black vulture is chunkier and heftier. And I think from what I've observed, the black vultures are usually more aggressive. And so the turkey vultures get there first, eat what they can. And then by the time the black vultures come around, they kind of scram. All right, so some of the anatomy of the vultures in general, not just Old World or New World, but some of them have this crop that's exposed. So a crop is almost like a forestomach. So when you don't know when you're going to eat next, you need to eat as much as you can where you are, because you're usually competing with other birds for it. And so you just fill up your crop or this forestomach, and it allows for storage, so you can kind of control digestion as you go. So vultures often eat large amounts very quickly. Oh, I'm sorry. My little one just came into the room. So it's, oh, okay. Can you go help her? I'm on a meeting, okay? No, okay, well, go out and find Dada, okay? I'll be out in just a minute. Dada must be distracted. So anyways, these crops you usually can't see, but on this hooded vulture, which is an Old World species, you can see he has eaten and he has this big exposed crop. So on the Old World vultures, you often, or you can see that frequently. And this is a king vulture. This is a New World vulture, but it also has that exposed crop. I saw this at the I think it was the National Aviary in Pittsburgh when I went there years ago, or maybe in the Smithsonian. I can't remember. Either way, long time ago, beautiful bird, but he had just had a big old meal because you could see all that food in the crop there. So another kind of misconception is that vultures will projectile vomit as a defense mechanism. Yes and no. They vomit more to just get away. So if you're a really, really big bird and you have to take a long running start to get up into the air and fly off, if you're eating, you just ate a bunch of food, something comes up that's going to threaten you, you want to lighten the load so you can take off quickly and get away from whatever danger there is. They don't have like a vomit gun that they can just shoot at pending predators or anything like that. So it's an exaggeration, but they do throw up as a way to escape more quickly. So kind of false. And one thing I like to point out is that a lot of people love the look of vultures, especially ones like this. The black vultures, as they get older, they kind of get these really exaggerated warts. But the bald look on their face is for a reason. It's not just because they're ugly. The lack of feathers on their heads helps to keep them clean. I used to say this as an educator when I was working with vultures, is that imagine you had a big bushy beard and you had a big spaghetti dinner in front of you and you couldn't use your hands to eat. And you just, ate that spaghetti dinner and it got all stuck in your beard and you weren't allowed to, clean yourself off, because if you don't have hands, you can't really, clean your face. It's going to get really matted, disgusting, smell, be real nasty. So that's why vultures, when they have to stick their head into a carcass and, fight for all that food and get all that stuff on their face, the lack of feathers really helps to control the amount of things that get stuck to them, and it's much easier to keep clean. So while they're not the prettiest to look at all the time, usually the bald face is for a cleanliness factor. And I think they're pretty. Some other interesting things, because the vultures have to eat very kind of rotted, dead food, depending on how old the food is that they found, they have very, very strong stomach acid. And to give you an idea of how strong it is, the bearded vulture here, they can digest a whole entire cow vertebrae in 2 days through its strong stomach acid. So that's very impressive. And I know they can eat, carcasses of elephants that have anthrax on it and be totally fine. So their abilities to ingest these things is pretty incredible. So urohydrosis is the thing that we mentioned before, that we could tell the New World vultures and storks are related, because they have this kind of white powdery substance on their legs. You can see right there with the red arrow. There's a few different theories behind why they do this. One might be to help keep cool. Oftentimes, storks are nesting in big, hot, open areas exposed in the sun. Vultures are often spending time also very exposed in the sun. And if you're a bird and you can't sweat, creating evaporative cooling by urinating on your legs is possibly an advantage to it. And then Paul, he worked on a study looking at the antimicrobial properties of the urohydrosis. Paul, do you have any thoughts or findings on that you want to share, or anything interesting?
Well, just sort of two quick things, and this came from working with you when you were at the Birds of Prey Center and other people. They said that it increases in frequency during the summer or in warmer temperatures, which seems consistent with the idea that they're cooling off. And there's some other birds like pigeons that do that same thing too, and they've had the same hypothesis. For the antimicrobial thing, there's something I read at one point, and I've tackled that twice now, and I had methodological problems each time in getting it to work. Like we needed to take we wanted to take pure uric acid. That's what people have said is the active ingredient in it that would make it antimicrobial. We wanted to take that and blend it into, like, make petri dishes that included that, but we just couldn't get the stuff into solution so that we could dissolve it in to make the petri dishes to plate out the bacteria and that sort of thing. We got it kind of, and we found a limited response against, God, this is like 5 or 6 years ago now. We found a limited response against one of the common bacteria, and the others, it didn't matter. But I never even tried to publish it because I didn't trust our methodology yet. So we need to crack that code of getting it into solution so we can make a good petri dish with it.
Okay. So that's another theory is, the antimicrobial properties, because what they're doing when they feed oftentimes is they use their foot to put right up against a carcass, and then they use their beak to tear off pieces. And so, their feet are getting just as dirty as their faces. And so, it could be a way of just increasing their hygiene and cleanliness, for the dirty job that they have. This is an example of urohydrosis on some storks. So you can see a little bit easier here. Their legs are supposed to be pink, but all the way down here, they're very white. So it's pretty apparent. And so urohydrosis is an interesting concept. And then the smell is another thing that is kind of, I wouldn't say unique to vultures, but a lot of birds, we don't have a great understanding of their sense of smell. We don't have a lot of evidence that shows that most birds have very good senses of smell. Most of them have very underdeveloped olfactory bulbs, but again, there's other groups of birds that do have good senses as well. But turkey vultures in general have a very good sense, and it's because of all the surface area in their nasal cavities, where you can see just how much tissue is kind of swirled around. It creates all that surface area for them to be able to detect molecules in the air. And it's so good that gas companies will actually put in ethyl mercaptan, which smells like rotting flesh. They'll put that into gas lines so that they can use vultures as an indicator for gas leaks out in big open areas. Usually out west where there's gas lines running across the landscape, they'll follow the vultures to potential gas leaks. So it's neat that they can use the birds in that way. Another interesting thing, I mentioned before how intelligent they are. Vultures are social. They always are hanging out together and, you know, roosting in groups and feeding together. And there's definitely a hierarchy there. And usually the more social a bird is, the more intelligent they are. And so some vultures have been shown to actually use tools, like the Egyptian vulture here. They will use rocks to crack open ostrich eggs, which is pretty smart. And I think there's another example of, it may be the bearded vulture who drops bones from high heights or cracks them open with rocks to get to the marrow. I can't remember specifically which one that was, but one of them does that. All right, so now we're going to move on to breeding. Vultures, their habits vary, and their breeding has a lot to do with their conservation status, because a lot of them are very slow breeders. So the griffon vultures will only mate every other year, and a lot of vultures usually have 1 to 2 eggs, depending on the species, maybe 3, but they don't have a very high replacement rate for their populations. So when there's an issue in conservation, it's not super easy to recreate and, you know, regenerate their population very quickly, because they're just not breeding that fast and replacing themselves. New World vultures typically nest on the ground, especially ours, a black and turkey vulture. And then Old World vultures, some of them construct a nest. This is a pretty impressive pile of sticks here for that griffon vulture. Ours is slightly less impressive. As far as vocalizations go, they don't have a lot of really good songs or vocalizations at all. I'm going to play this. Watch out, it might be loud. Anyone who's dozing off, you're about to get woken up. I think I played this on the Zoom call the other day, and it was pretty loud. All right, so that is some of the Old World vulture vocalizations. They do more of it like a cackle and a talk, and then New World, more of just a hiss and a grunt, and it's not very pretty at all. But I believe they lack like the syrinx structures that other songbirds do, so they don't really have the ability to change pitch in their voices and stuff like that. They really just hiss and grunt for the most part, and especially when they're taking off or when they're threatened. So not a whole lot going on there. Sunning is something a lot of people have seen vultures do, and it looks a little ominous, a little creepy, and there's not a lot of really good evidence to, you know, say why they do this. They've done studies when people say, oh, it's so they can warm up in the morning, they're trying to raise their body temperature, but studies have been done looking at the core temperature before and after and during these sunning exercises, and there really wasn't a significant increase in their core temperature or anything like that. Other people say it has to do with the microbial communities. Sunlight kills a lot of microbes, and so maybe that's just another sanitary habit that they have, trying to sun their feathers, kill any microbes that might be on there that might you know, hurt their overall health. And then this guy on the left is preening, and you can actually see his little uropygial gland right there, which is an oil gland that a lot of birds have and use to condition their feathers. Doesn't really have anything to do with vultures, but I just noticed it, so I kind of pointed it out. Okay, so our vultures in South Carolina, we have the two. The turkey vultures, you can see they're easy to tell apart in a few different ways. First of all, the redhead is going to be a turkey vulture, but in flight, it can be a little bit more difficult, especially if they're further off. One good way is the dihedral flight pattern, which means their wings are tilted up a little bit as they fly, and they also kind of rock back and forth. Turkey vultures do. So if you're seeing a really big dark bird off in the distance, it could either be a bald eagle, a turkey vulture, or a black vulture. Look for that flight and that rocking back and forth. They also have the open nares, and then the red head, but not always, because juveniles will have that dark head. So look at for those big, giant, open nares there. Pretty obvious. And up close, a lot of people don't think they're pretty, but they have this gorgeous iridescent sheen. When it catches the sunshine, it's almost like an oil slick. Very, very pretty. And then as chicks, we have, this is a turkey vulture. Sometimes they're a little hard to tell when they're real young. They're very, very white and very, very fluffy. You can see those big nares there. And this one is nesting in the base of an old tree. So as much time as I spent out in the woods, I have never found a turkey vulture nest, or a vulture nest in general. They nest on the ground. I know they nest in old barns and old sheds, and sometimes they'll nest around buildings. I've seen a few nest around elementary schools and things like that, but I've never run into one, and it's crazy because with how many vultures we have around here, you'd think you'd see them more often. With black vultures, they are found more in the southern United States, but they've been expanding northwards the past decade or so. And part of that, I think, is they're following the highways north. The highways are where a lot of the food is with the roadkill. And so they're just expanding their range along with changing temperatures and climate patterns. Their wing patterns are different than the turkey vulture. The turkey vulture before had that light silvery color from the tips of their wings all the way to their body, whereas the black vultures just have these white wingtips. So it's much more apparent from the bottom side, from the ventral side. You see it's almost like white gloves on the ends of their wings, and then black everywhere else. And then they also have the dark head, and it's a little bit warty. And then you can see on this next picture, the nares, the nostril holes, are almost like just little slits in their bill. So very, very different from the wide gaping holes of the turkey vulture. And then this is a black vulture nest. Their little guys look like, I think it looks like dirty dryer lint. That's what that reminds me of. But if you've ever felt a young vulture, which I don't recommend, I only know because I used to work with them, is they are so soft. Like their down is just, it's almost like you can't even register it, feel with your hands. You have to like use the back of your hand to actually, feel it. Very cute little guys. And a big issue with this, with them nesting on the ground, is they often get picked up by mistake. People find a baby bird on the ground and they think, oh no, mom has been killed, or she's abandoned them. They've fallen out of a nest, and so I got to take it home and feed it. Well, that's how a lot of vultures end up imprinted and then end up in captivity. So if you ever find what you think is a baby vulture on the ground, it's fine where it is. Mom is probably off looking for a roadkill somewhere and going to bring some back. But they're supposed to be there. So yeah, a lot of captive vultures have ended up in captivity because of that reason. Well intentions, but wasn't the right thing to do. So now vultures are unfortunately in trouble in a lot of areas around the world, mostly in the old world for a number of reasons that I'll get into, but also people tend to not like them. And so it's hard for a bird that's been kind of villainized in cartoons and movies and old westerns to really capture people's attention and admiration. So Disney didn't do them a whole lot of favors, except in the Jungle Book. In the Jungle Book, they were good guys, but many other cartoons and stuff, vultures are often painted in a negative light. But one of the biggest problems that we've discovered what the issue is, and there's been work to correct it, but the Indian vulture crisis, or the Asian vulture crisis, was a very, very big issue. They've lost, I think it was something like 98% of their vulture populations in the past couple decades. And for a while, they didn't know why. 97 to 99% between 1992 and 2002. So the vultures just completely started to drop off the map. And they discovered that it was because of the use of a veterinary anti-inflammatory medication called diclofenac. So this came onto the market, and it over in India and Asia, some cultures consider cows to be sacred animals, and so they don't eat them necessarily, and so they care for them as if they were pets or something similar. And so when the cows would get old, they would give them anti-inflammatory drugs when they were having issues. And then when these cows would die, the vultures would come in, consume the meat with this diclofenac, and then it would cause kidney failure, I believe. And so it took a while for them to understand what was causing this. And then it was also a long time before they could, track down all these rural areas where this drug was still being used and create awareness campaigns. It was a very widespread problem. So they, did public awareness campaigns, and they also did vulture restaurants. So they would get, meat that they knew wasn't tainted with the diclofenac and put it out for the vultures to eat, to have, safe meals and stuff like that. But it took a lot of work, and some of the populations have begun to stabilize. But I mentioned before, you know, a lot of the vultures take a while to reproduce. And so it's been a slow but steady climb. Once they've gotten diclofenac out of the environment, it's gotten better. There are other issues, unfortunately, especially in Africa where poaching is still a problem. Poachers will actually poison carcasses to kill the vultures just so that the crime scene is hidden for longer and the feds aren't tipped off to what has happened. So they're intentionally being killed through that means, you know, for no good reason, really. And so that's also a big issue. And that one is, you know, just like poaching, very difficult to fight. So with that, when you have vultures disappearing, they obviously are a big part of our ecosystem. They clean up all the dead stuff. And what happens when you don't have vultures in the area, you have other scavengers that begin to explode in population because of the increase in available resources. So mammalian scavengers in India and Africa and places where these vultures have declined began to rise in population very suddenly. And so when you have a lot of mammalian scavengers, you have a lot of stray dogs and, you know, coyote type animals, you know, depending on where you are, rats and mice and things like that. And the thing about those mammalian scavengers is we share a lot of diseases with them, especially rabies and distemper and all those sorts of things, and then flea-borne diseases. So during the Indian vulture crisis, there was 47,000 deaths from rabies because of the increase in these mammalian scavengers. And there was an increased cost of $34 billion in medical expenses that they pretty much directly attributed to the loss of vultures. So it's not just that, oh yeah, they keep our ecosystem clean and, you know, it's nice that they can, you know, recycle the nutrients, but they really do help keep us healthy in a very, very major way by keeping these other mammalian scavengers in check. So this is a little vulture appreciation and awareness ad. It's sure, pandas are cute, but do they take out the trash? So just a way of trying to appreciate vultures because they do, as it says, by consuming diseased carcasses, vultures help maintain nature's pristine beauty and reduce the spread of rabies, bubonic plague, tuberculosis, brucellosis, I'm not familiar with that one, and botulism. All those are very bad things. So the fact that vultures can really effectively reduce that is a good thing. And, you know, it's a bit of a hot topic lately too with our current pandemic crisis. So out of the vultures in Africa, 7 of them are on the verge of extinction, and some of them are critically endangered. So it's a pretty serious issue in Africa right now, and a lot of it has to do with the poaching, and the poison carcasses. So, you know, there's a lot of health issues in Africa already with rural communities and lack of healthcare, but add this on top of it, and it's just compounding a lot of issues. So something to consider and something to worry about. Now, as far as some of our vultures go, we have had issues with the California condor. As you know, many of them reduced very, very quickly. We almost lost a California condor, but thanks to captive breeding, they've come back. But their issue was kind of a combination of things: persecution, you know, the negative view of vultures, egg collection, cyanide poisoning, the intentional poisoning of them, loss of food sources. We used to have a ton of buffalo or bison roaming around, and a lot of them would die and they get eaten by condors, and well, we don't have those bison anymore. So these guys lost a lot of their food. Lead poisoning has also been an issue. So a hunter shoots a deer runs off and dies, he doesn't recover it. These guys come in, ingest the lead pellets, and it's a big problem. So condors had a lot of problems. They got down to 27 individuals that were in the wild, and they were captured and brought into captive breeding facilities. And thankfully, they are starting to rebound. So there are now 500 individuals, and about half of them are flying free. And this is an old stat. I know there's new condors that have been breeding in the wild since then. So it is starting to look up, and there's a lot more awareness about it. But it just goes to show that, you know, captive breeding programs and zoo programs like that are important to have in place so that when birds like this or animals like this get to that level, there's hope that they can be saved. All right. So our vultures also, so they face the lead poisoning that I mentioned, rat poison, and car collisions. You know, vultures are pretty good at being car aware, but they're not always good at getting out of the way just in time. You know, they take advantage of the fact that we run over a lot of dead stuff or over a lot of animals with our cars. And so that's what they take advantage of. And this was at the end of my driveway. I don't think I did that to that squirrel, but someone ran over a squirrel at the end of my driveway, and this guy was cleaning it up for me. But one thing to consider, something you could do to help with this, we all drive cars, we all go places, but one thing that you might not think about is throwing food out of your window. So if you're on a car trip and you have banana peel or an apple core and you think, oh, I don't want this, smelling up the car for the next hour before I stop, you chuck it out the window thinking, oh, it's biodegradable, an animal will eat it, it's fine. Well, that's the problem. An animal will eat it. So you attract small mice, rats, to the side of the road where they're going to eat this, and then owls and hawks will come and hunt by the side of the road after these mice, going after the food in the trash. Or you get raccoons who are eating it, they get hit. Then vultures come in, then they get hit. A lot of bald eagles get hit by cars because they're taking advantage of roadkill. So just even if you think you have biodegradable organic stuff to chuck out the window, don't do it. Wait till the rest stop. Lead poisoning is also a big issue, and this is a picture of a lead bullet, and then after it's been fired, you can see the lead fragments just explode into an animal. And so when something gets shot, dies, and then the vultures or the eagles or red-tailed hawks, whatever it is, comes to eat it, they ingest this and get lead poisoning. So they don't get lead poisoning by being shot themselves. They have to ingest it for it to get into their system. So that's kind of the difference. It's not necessarily them being shot by lead ammunition. Making the switch is really important. I don't think enough people know about this, especially hunters who don't realize what's going on. But on the left is your lead bullet with the exploded fragments. On the right is a copper bullet. And so I think for a while there was a rule that you could only use copper ammunition in wildlife refuges, but with the change in administration, they rolled back that regulation. So there's a lot of lead issues out there. It's very widespread. I think a lot of birds that come into like avian medical clinics have a baseline level of lead in their systems. So I think it's something that, politically we should be working on. So if anyone wants to take that up, let me know. And this is what it looks like when these birds get lead poisoning, and a lot of it is eagles. So it's a very sad thing, and it's preventable. So something we need to think about. Rat poison is another.
Hey, Jen.
Yeah.
Hey, Jen. Sorry. A quick question.
Yeah.
So the question is, will they eat each other? And I know that black vultures and turkey vultures will not eat another vulture. Is that the same for other vultures around the world? Or is that just unique to our vultures here in South Carolina? Do you know?
That is a great question. I don't know. I'll have to look into that. Great question. I know vultures won't eat each other, but eagles will. When they're chicks, they'll commit siblicide in the nest. So yeah, some raptors do, and but vultures do not. Good stuff. So the next thing I was going to talk about is rat poison. It's a very common method to get rid of rats around your home. You often see those black bait stations outside of people's homes. And the issue with that is a rat goes in, eats a poison, goes off somewhere and dies, and then other predators or any scavengers will eat it. Then they also get sick, and it just kind of goes up the chain, the food chain, from the rats up to the raptors to foxes to large cats. And it kills them fairly quickly, and it's pretty sad to see when that happens. And locally, that's been a big issue on Kiowa Island. Someone put out rat poison, and it took out I think at least 5 or 6 bobcats last year. So a lot of the ones that they track and maintain on the island and follow with radio collars, a lot of them were killed off by rat poison in just the span of a few weeks. So it's pretty crazy how quick that takes a big effect. Now, this is something that I do not recommend for everybody, but this is something that I do. This is a fox I found in the middle of the road on the way out to McElhaney, actually, one day. And since a lot of birds get hit by cars, if it's safe, I will pick up roadkill and throw it off to the side of the road. I've seen cars come up on a roadkill site with vultures on it, and they swerve to hit the birds because they just don't understand or bored. But it's something that I do. But again, I do not recommend for anybody because it's kind of gross. And then also, you don't want to put yourself in danger. But my mother was a little embarrassed, but she was not embarrassed enough to take a picture when I did this. one thing to keep in mind, because we're all aware of vultures now and we all love them, the first Saturday in September every year is International Vulture Awareness Day. So it came from the International Vulture Crisis. And so if you are looking to celebrate vultures and teach people about them, the first Saturday in September is a great way to do it. And with that, has anyone hugged a vulture today? Do we have a lot of vulture fans now? And I just saw this while I was getting the PowerPoint ready, but in these crazy times, remember just to keep calm and carry on. Now I'm open for questions, if anyone has any other questions.
I've wanted to start with, Jen.
Yeah.
I never really thought about the exposed crops on there and didn't pay attention to it before. Have you ever heard any suggestions of what is the advantage or the evolutionary significance of that?
No, I don't.
Is it just a signal of some kind, maybe?
It could be. Maybe it's visible so that birds will, not be as aggressive towards someone who already has a full crop. Possibly. That's a great question. Emily, do you have any insights on that?
I don't. It is a great question, and I'm not positive. It's definitely something to look into.
Yeah.
With the kind of research that I do, I tend to think everything is sexual selection and used in mate choice or whatever, and so I try to break out of that mold. But I can imagine that if they were courting, excuse me, the female might want to mate with a male that has a big bulging pouch, meaning that he's going to be able to help feed the kids, or that he's healthy, or that.
Yeah, maybe it's a capacity thing. Size matters in an exposed crop. I don't know.
Yeah.
Jennifer, that was a fantastic presentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It was awesome.
It was great. So I had a couple questions. One, just a thought about the crop is it exposed and bare when it's empty, or is it just something that if it were feathered, you'd have too many feathers when it was empty. But that would only make sense.
When it's empty, it just kind of disappears. Like you don't even see it. So after they've eaten, it kind of just like pokes out from the feathers.
And then the other thing was a question. So I tried to look up. So if our New World vultures are related to storks, are the Old World and New World storks, are they related? And so are our New World vultures actually related to Old World storks as well as New World storks?
That's a great question. I'm going to say I think that they are related, just because they also do that eurohydrosis, which kind of carries over, and that's one of the ways we link New World vultures to storks. I think they are. I don't know, Emily, you got any thoughts, or Paul?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I think so too. These are really old species for the most part. And so, yeah, they probably come back to a common ancestor, but I think it'd be a long time ago.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking about that crop business too, that when we look at a bird, we see feathers everywhere. And unless you've actually dissected one, or if you've plucked a chicken or something, but when you're cooking it, you'll learn that they don't have feathers everywhere. They grow in tracts. And then they just spread those contour feathers out to cover the bare spots, which is a real help in migration. They can dump heat. But I would have sworn that one of the tracts went right down the belly over where the crop would normally be. I have to get on my ornithology text again, which makes it even weirder than, or more conspicuous, that they're purposely showing this thing. Like if you look at the prairie chickens, where it's not the crop, it's air sacs, I think, but they have those like two big bright orange things. Those are on either side of the feather tract. So with this thing being right in the middle, that's even weirder. I need to learn more about it.
I think it probably, the crop sits in the furculum, or that hollow just above their keel bone. And typically that's not feathered right at the base of their neck, pretty much. Right. It's like right above where their sternum kind of would be. So I think it's placed there. And so as it expands, kind of like falls out in a way, or expands outward. And so usually when you're checking for fat on migratory birds, that clavicle area is usually open, and then all around it is feathered.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I'm thinking about it correctly, that's where it's coming from.
Yeah, Hey, Jen, we had a question in the chat from Becky asking, are vultures aggressive to other animals?
Well, they can be. I think it all depends on the size of the dog and the fight, if you will.
Mhm.
Vultures, depending on how hungry they are, they will be more or less aggressive. They'll consider risks and situations. I have heard of stories of newborn livestock animals being taken by vultures, and so they're not solely only dead carcass eaters. They will take live prey if it's convenient or available or opportunistic. So
Usually that's black vultures.
yeah.
I would say more, more time. The black vultures seem to be more aggressive than the turkey vultures.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Good question. But I know people talk about, being worried about their dog or their cat because there's vultures around. I don't think that's a major issue. People, occasionally call us asking about that, but, they should be more worried about coyotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I can say is, here in South Carolina, when I was working at a medical facility for birds, I would say that 8 out of 10 birds or vultures, black vultures and turkey vultures that came into the clinic for, wing fractures or whatever, we always tested them for lead, and I would say 8 out of 10 had higher levels of lead. 8 out of 10 in this state, which is, I think we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah, I think that's a bigger issue between that and the rat poison. I feel like between public awareness and letting people know what alternatives are or how to safely use those things, it's something that I think we need to change, because I think we could save a lot of birds every year in our own communities by taking care of those two sources of illness. So
Is there any idea of how many trophic levels those anticoagulant rodenticides will go? Does it ever lose its efficacy, or does it just keep killing?
that's a great question. So I'm not sure how much. I guess the lethal dose is what we're going to be talking about, because animals at high trophic levels like cougars, they've lost a number of cougars to rat poison. I've seen articles, in California recently, but I don't know if that's because a cougar directly ate a rat that was poisoned or it ate something that had eaten a rat. I'm not sure what the potency level is. I guess it would kind of depend on the situation. But yeah, I don't know if it. I don't think it's a bioaccumulation sort of thing like DDT, where it gets in the fat molecules and carries up the food chain in that way because it's fat soluble. So I would guess it would have to be more of a direct consumption of something that had just consumed it, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Any other insight on that is welcome.
I don't know. I guess I would have assumed biomagnification within them. And I probably shouldn't use the terms. I know there's a difference between bioaccumulation and biomagnification, and I forget which one is which.
Yeah.
But if it's, so if you eat something, like the cougar eats a bunch of rats, each of which was poisoned, it seems like the levels would go up, especially if it's fat soluble and can be stored in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I had another sort of general question too. Excuse me. Or first, I want to make a pitch for anybody that we still have most of the people I know. I've just put this in the chat, but I want to remind everybody that we'll be taking off with the lecture series. Well, first, thank you for stepping up at the last minute when Austin could make it, and hopefully we can get him back to talk about his bat research at some point in the fall.
Yeah.
So I want to say that, but we'll be taking off for the summer. I think even the field trips pretty much are winding down, although you can watch the Google Calendar on our webpage. But I just want to make a pitch too, to say that even though we're taking off from the lectures and the field trips, we still have our social media stuff going on, so you can get information like this. If you go to Charleston Audubon and Natural History Society on Facebook, there's a group of us, and Jen is really active on this. They keeps it going, where every day we dig up a couple things and put on there. We also have an Instagram page, although I don't think we've posted on it in months, and a Twitter feed too that doesn't get a lot of activity. If anybody wants to take those on to post something once a week or something like that, I will happily set you up as an admin. but there are other ways to get this sort of information out there. So having said all that, then I had a question too. With the California condors, I know there were the big problems with the lead poisoning, but wasn't there a problem with them getting into antifreeze somehow? Like they were getting, it's not just them, it's other animals too, but like if a car's radiator has a leak, apparently it's really sweet, but it's also toxic as hell.
Oh,
I could swear that a couple of them were lost to that.
that is very possible. I'll have to look that up because I'm not sure, but yeah, that's entirely possible. That and power lines, birds get electrocuted on power lines sometimes too, and those
Yeah.
big guys with the really big wingspans, when they go to land, they'll touch the two wires with their wings and create that complete circuit. So I think that was probably an issue for them as well. So poor condors had a lot going up against them.
Hey, Jen,
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Do you know when the term buzzard came to be in the United States
I
for
do.
vultures?
That was a byproduct of the Pilgrims. So the Pilgrims, when they came over, or your early European settlers, they have something called the common buzzard in England, and it's a brown bird. It's a hawk. It's like pretty much England's red-tailed hawk, very similar to ours, a little bit smaller, but a dark brown bird. And so when they came over to North America, they didn't have vultures like ours where they were from. They saw these turkey vultures. They looked like the buzzards, so that's what they started to call them. So buzzard is technically a term for, as you know, Emily, buteos or broad-winged soaring hawks. So if you saw a red-tailed hawk and called it a buzzard, that would be accurate. But if you see a turkey vulture and say, oh, there's a buzzard, inaccurate. And you can thank the early American settlers from Europe for that one. It's stuck for a really long time.
I have another sort of technical question for you, Jen. I know that this is being recorded. Actually, I'll throw this out to anybody. Hopefully we can post that on the on our webpage, charlestonnaudubon.org, or on the Facebook page or somewhere like that. But can a recording be Zoom bombed?
No.
Does anybody know?
It should be fine. So if you put up a recording, I think it's either a straight recording, like a file, or we can upload it to a YouTube channel. So you could just follow a link to the YouTube video where you can watch it there. So that should be fine. Now that, I mean, knock on wood, unless someone jumps in right now, I think we've made it through. Our gatekeeper Emily has kept us safe. So yeah, I think we're good. And we can even post that on Facebook, with a link to wherever the recording is. So if some people want to watch it after the fact.
Yeah. I told you at the beginning that I'm trying to think up labs for my intro bio students. They're going to watch this.
Oh, good.
And then write a little report or something like that. So please do send along the link or post it up to Facebook or something like that, so we get access, like whatever you think is best.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think it takes a little while to process, but I think in the next day or two I should have it and be able to figure out how to get it out there. So
I've been recording my my lectures every day, and they've been pretty good, like an hour, I think. That might be because we have an institutional account, but I guess you guys do too. This is through Audubon, South Carolina, right?
yeah, we use
potentially
that
even later tonight.
for it, so we should be good.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, it's good seeing and
Hey,
talking.
Good job, Jen.
Yeah.
Hey, let me see one more vulture question.
Sure.
I've been telling my students this for years, and hopefully it's true. And that is that, in general, birds don't have a great sense of smell, but it's often said to be kind of similar to ours, which is orders of magnitude less than what dogs have and that sort of thing. But that among our two species here, the turkey vulture really is more visually oriented because it doesn't have that great a sense of smell. But I read somewhere that the black vulture, maybe I was just told and I'm just parroting it, the black vultures I have it backwards. The turkey vultures have a decent sense of smell, and so they hunt by the scent, and that the black vultures hunt by looking for turkey vultures.
Yes.
In your experience, is that true?
Yes, that is true. When I used to work at the Center for Birds of Prey, and we had a vulture restaurant out. Usually, you'd see the turkey vultures be the first ones start to come in, and there were a lot of birds around there that were habituated. But yeah, if you started pulling out some pretty smelly stuff, you'd see the turkey vultures coming in first, and then the black vultures would see the turkey vultures, and then they would come in. Mm-hmm. So yeah, from experience, I can confirm that that's kind of how it works.
And that makes sense if they're heavier too. If the black vultures are heavier,
mm-hmm.
which is something I learned from the talk.
Oh, good.
So.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Great.
you,
I
Jen.
thought I knew about vultures. I didn't know. I didn't know about vultures.
That is the plan. Make more vulture fans. So I'm glad it worked.
Well, yeah. All right, y'all take care.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you
Take
guys.
care.
Bye-bye.
All right.